Welcome back to our Idea Launch series. This is episode 2. In our last episode, we focused on the 4 key areas of risk for software product development. In this episode, we want to talk about how discovery helps reduce risk. My name is Darrin Grove. I'm the founder of TrueFit. My background is software development. I'm joined today by John Beck again. Welcome back, John.
Hey, Darrin.
John is TrueFit's Director of Product Design. So, one of the things we hear really often is, we're so interested in product ideas and we want to jump right into building something. Yep. And we hear that all the time, kind of anxiousness to get into the build. And what we recommend is that really start with discovery, the discovery process. And that's what we want to unpack today. So as we jump in, kind of take us from kind of risk to discovery. What is discovery? Why does it matter? How does it help reduce risk? And then we'll unpack kind of the key phases of a discovery process as we do it.
Yeah. Discovery is, it can be a bit of a mystery a little bit, I think, to people who are delving into this maybe for the first time. They haven't built a product before, but it really comes out of the product management world. The idea of running kind of targeted experiments up front. So really having a healthy understanding of the risks that you face going into, you're going to make a product. It's not just software. You're going to make a product, a tool that somebody's going to use to solve a problem. And usually with software, it's a complex set of problems where there aren't really clear, direct answers. There's not like a straight path to the finish line. So it can get very complex. So what discovery does is, up front, the whole product development process, technically you're discovering along the way. We're very agile. We believe in chunking the work down into small planned units and learning along the way. Yeah, that we can pivot. So in a sense, we're discovering along the way regardless. But to have an explicit discovery stage in the process up front is to say, for this product, we have identified some specific risks. It'll vary with the product, and some are more significant than others or more complicated. But we're going to first pull those things out, and we're going to focus on kind of a set of experiments. So we do take a kind of empirical approach to it. Like, what evidence can we collect that these things are actually going to, if we do this, if we build this feature, it's going to engage users, or it's going to help them get this job done that they need to get done, that the team knows that we can build it, that the business knows how they can support it. And if we can collect that evidence early, kind of illuminate issues along the way, so we can make kind of the big level pivots before we get into the build. And that's really what we're trying to do with discovery, is really just test those underlying assumptions that could really send you off track if you let that carry into the build.
Is it fair to say that the discovery stage of the process is trying to make sure we're building the right thing? We're trying to make sure that we're solving the right problems?
Exactly. Yeah, okay. It's very much a problem-solving kind of focus around, before we get too far down into the solution, let's make sure that we understand the problem and what people need, or what the constraints are around. We know we're trying to do something, but often they're the technical constraints or the regulatory constraints or legal or, constraints coming from business partners that are in, part of this, that, we often don't just have a straight shot to the finish line. We have to navigate a complex set of relationships to get the product to where it can actually be released into the market.
Yeah. So is it also fair to say that, the instinct to jump right into a build has to do with speed to market, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like we need to get a product in market, we need to start testing it. But as we talked about in the last episode, that's where things are expensive to change. So figuring out the right thing to build and making sure that we're building the right features, making sure that we're addressing these key areas of risk is where to start. I know that the very first step that somebody takes with TrueFit when we're working on a product together is a pretty high intensity workshop that we call the Discovery Workshop, which is really the kickoff to that whole process. What are we trying to accomplish in a Discovery Workshop? What would people experience if they were taking that first step with us?
Yeah, you got to start somewhere, right? It's
Right.
like, part of what we're trying to do in the workshop is, it works on a number of levels. On one level, we're getting to know our customer, our client better, that we're understanding their business domain, we're understanding the market, we're understanding kind of how they got to the vision in the
what's
first
the background?
place. Like who are the stakeholders? What we try to do very early is then get them aligned around what the outcomes are. Like from your business perspective, why do this? What is it that we're trying to do at a business level and at a product level?
Mm-hmm.
Like if we're trying to enter a new market, or we're trying to revive kind of a dying business unit, or
we're trying to automate a process that's very manual today,
or we need to move to counter what one of our competitors is doing, or somebody's disrupting the market, and we've got to shift our approach. So we have to understand outcomes early and first, and make sure that what are the most important outcomes. There often are many that are pertinent to the project, but which are the most important that we're going to be measured against? Like, is this going to be a success or not?
Right. So what does success look like?
Yeah.
If we're at the end of this project and we're all raising a glass and celebrating, what have we accomplished at that point that's going to make everybody say, this is a win?
Exactly. And then, that is always a lively discussion, and it's a super fun discussion. It's like we love learning these things, and you're trying to draw out that complexity and say, okay, let's set that aside for a second, and let's say, like, if these are the really critical outcomes that you're trying to get to, now let's, given our 4 areas of risk, let's start to unpack that. Who is the customer? Who's going to buy this product? And ultimately, who's the end user of that product? If this is a consumer mobile app, they're the same person. You're going to go to the App Store, find what you want. That looks interesting. Download it for free, maybe pay for features later. But if this is a big enterprise app and there's many users and it's a complex sales process and it's a complex, there's a license and somebody's going to buy it and it's going to be distributed across a big organization, that's a more complex scenario. So we really try to break that down, that if it's in, healthcare, where we might be dealing with doctors, nurses, and hospital administrators, as well as patients and their families. So,
and insurance companies. And,
how
a lot
do
of different
we
stakeholders. Yeah.
map all of that out? Really getting into understanding kind of context, pulling out all this subject matter expertise, because our clients have that, that there are people that have been working in the field for a long time or have dealt with similar cases. Maybe they're a user themselves, but it's critical that they understand that, they need to kind of widen the perspective and make sure, one of the things we talk about a lot is, blind spots and having kind of a healthy regard for relying too heavily on your assumptions about how something is going to go. We want to actually start to collect and get feedback from these users and make sure, because they're not all like you. You might be a subject matter expert, but there's, people use the product in different ways for different reasons.
So starting with empathy for the user is really where this process
It is
begins.
absolutely fundamental. Yeah, and trying to understand, that what drives them, what are they hearing, what are they learning, what are they concerned about. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's where their kind of emotions come into play, depending on the nature of the product. That can be a big factor. So collectively, in that, we go to now a more sort of hypothetical stance of what if scenarios. Like, what if if this is what we think the user's needs are, and here's what kind of current reality starts to look like for them. Here's how they do it today. What often comes out in that conversation are that our clients are doing this. There are workarounds that might require multiple steps, and it's complicated and a pain. And that's where they see the value is. We could take 6 steps down to 1. So we map that out with them, and that really starts to set up this kind of hypothetical framework of, if we build this, we think that it's going to have this result on this user. And if that's true, that it's going to start to move us towards the outcome that we're trying to get as a business, that they'll pay for it, or that they'll use it every day, or they'll tell their friends about it, and the product will grow the way we need it to grow. So we begin to identify these experiments that we want to do really early on, day one in the process. That's
how many times when this happens in practice, how many times do teams come in entirely on the same page versus how many times does everybody have a whole bunch of different ideas? And how does the workshop we talked a lot about team alignment in the last episode. How does this, even on day one, begin to form team alignment?
Yeah, it's a very often, we have people that are sort of tied to an initiative and they have a stake, but they haven't always gotten into a room together, or, some of the exercises, we do a lot of collaborative kind of design exercises to work through. And it starts to get revealed that they have differing visions on where this needs to go, or where the business is going. And so,
how often does that happen? Is it once in a while or every time?
Pretty much every workshop is, that's a common thing when we have a lot of stakeholders, and sometimes those stakeholders aren't in the same company. They're partners, or they're providing a piece. One of the things that we love to do are connected device experiences where there's hardware involved and maybe sensors, and there's a third or fourth party on the data side that they're partnering with, other services. And, this is the first real chance to get in the room and start to connect the dots between outcome and potential solutions, and start to dig down into assumptions. And so we don't solve any problems in the workshop, but we start to flesh that out, because where we come out of the workshop then is like, okay, now we know where we need to go talk to users to really understand more about this aspect of how do they currently solve the problem, or more about the context, or, maybe we've got to go do a deep dive around some of the technologies involved and look at APIs and look at other services, that could be part of the solution. And so that workshop really is instrumental in kind of setting the direction of what the discovery comes to look like. But there's a lot of work yet to do early on.
Yeah. So one of the things I remember from back when you and I first met, my engineering background can actually kind of get in the way at this point in the process, because what I tend to do is jump very quickly to solutions, right? Like, what are the features? What's this thing need to do? And the reality is I'm working with tons of assumptions. But what we don't want to do is create a solution in search of a problem. So what you've taught me to do, and I really appreciate this, and I'm still learning to a certain extent, I'm still learning how to do this, but you've taught me a new reflex, which is to begin with the problem. Why? Making sure that we understand the problem, making sure that we're solving a real problem, making sure so why is it important to start with a clear definition of the problem that we're solving?
So, when we talk a lot about user needs, like a user can have many needs, but they're not necessarily all equal, and some are more higher priority than others. And we're trying to understand those needs in relation to helping them solve the problem that they need, but also try to understand like what other products are in the space. So what potential solutions would be distinctive or unique? What, are we going to solve all these needs, or is there more of a subset that starts to paint a picture of what we could build a complete product around? Like day one, it might only solve one problem for a user, but there's a rich opportunity to grow and expand to other problems. But it does start to set the tone of like this idea of progressively solving or kind of widening the problem set, or widening the solution set, I should say, which really gets into road mapping and sensible ways to kind of invest and build out your product. But early on, we do some neat things to really make sure that we're understanding the problem, that we're illuminating any blind spots. You might understand part of it, but you're missing another key part of it, and how those two are related. But often what we find in there is that there's sort of a relative kind of opportunity factor, that not all the needs are equal. Some needs are really critical. And when we're trying to design a product that completely solves the problem, like we want to make sure that we're hitting on the really critical aspects of the problem early on. And so that's where we do put some emphasis on, here's where we want to focus our efforts early in this problem space. It's where, these things are really important to users. They're really critical to the success of the product. And we don't know much about our solution yet. We don't know that, we don't have a lot of evidence to sort of drive the solution. So that's where we're going to focus first. And so teeing up problems in relation to risk and priority early, then the team can start into the solution.
Yeah, so I know we talk about it sometimes in terms of understanding. What are some of the things we want to understand, and then framing, kind of strategy. And so what do we want to understand at a high level, and kind of what's framing all about?
Yeah, so framing is starting to connect the dots and to make sense of this problem space. So designers, we do a lot of things like understand maybe the emotional journey that the customer goes through. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has highs and low points now. And therefore, where are the opportunities to hit some of those low points and bring them up? Maybe a product is great, but it isn't solving the full problem. So let's understand kind of what comes before they use the product, what is happening in parallel to their use of the product, and where do they come out of this? Like they use the product to do X, and maybe they need to share it with, there's an output and they need to share it with other people, or they got to schedule an appointment, or they need to send something from a status standpoint, that trying to understand kind of how this product connects to the rest of their life outside. So we do a lot of what we would call like modeling and trying to understand early patterns for user experience that are going to get them to help overcome those risks of, product value and product usability. That also starts a really healthy discussion in the team then about the technologies that make the most sense. Like there's a lot of ways to skin a cat sometimes. What's the best technology to marry up to this solution? Sometimes we don't always know the touch points. Like, is this a website? Is this a native mobile application that users are using on their phone? Is it both? Are there other pieces of the puzzle? So how do we get to like a consistent experience? If, I could start the experience on a phone, put it down, go to my desktop, maybe later in the day, and I'm getting things in my email. Like, so really where is the patient connecting with this experience from end to end? So it requires us to kind of connect some dots and start to paint some early pictures of how this whole experience can work and exist alongside other things that the user is experiencing in their day-to-day life, which is complicated and busy, and everybody's fighting for attention and energy. So we want to make sure that we are really kind of there for them in the ways that they need.
So what's the output of this upfront, what we call the problem space, right? What do you get at the end?
Yeah. So, what we're aiming for in this early part of discovery is, product strategy. That's where, here are all the problems that we could solve, but now we start to get them into priority order and say, like, these are the most critical things to solve. So out of the gate, does it solve this problem first before we get into some of these others? And while some others are legit, we might not even address them in the first release of the product. So trying to get the goals set up for solutioning. So when we go into solutioning, we now have an idea. We've got to tackle these problems first. These are high opportunity targets that we want to hit. And they each have their own assumptions. They each have their own risks. Some are, more complex than others. And we want to hit that early before we get too far into the build. So that strategy is really shaping that up.
So now we're ready to build, right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So the common question.
So we've clearly defined, we prioritize problems. Now we're ready to focus on what the solution is. How do we do that?
Yeah. So, here's where prototyping really starts to kick in, of like, if this is the risk, now the team can start really digging deeper into these kind of what if scenarios of looking at where are the opportunities to really solve this problem in a distinct and valuable way that is easy to use. And so as we start to frame that out, we'll create early prototypes. We talk sometimes around low fidelity or high fidelity. Like, these are kind of conceptual. Here's a workflow. Here's the information that you might encounter to drive decisions along the way. And then they increasingly get more high fidelity. They start looking like real software, beautiful screens in the right colors, the right, it reflects your brand. It's got real content in it that we can start to create some artifacts that we can put in front of users to confirm or validate that we are on the right track. Often what we try to encourage there is that what we're looking for are alternative solutions. So we can do it this way, and we can do it another way, or we can do this way. Let's have a conversation with users about which is optimal, and get a little bit under the hood of why is that the preferred solution.
So hitting on that risk of value again,
Yeah.
hitting on the usability risks. That's now we have a prototype that represents, okay, here's the way this product is really going to work. Did we get it right?
Yeah.
Really at that.
And it has a kind of electrifying effect on the team. Like, not only are we getting kind of feedback to test the assumptions, but there's a confidence factor that starts to build in the team. Like, there's some real empathy. Like, we really do understand, and you'll find that the the teams now could start to talk for months about like, oh, this is that problem when so-and-so encounters this. That's the hurdle that we want to help them get past. Or this is where they run into all this complexity. Or this is where we have to help them navigate a lot of different decisions all at once. And we get empathy out of that. We get understanding of kind of preference and why. And that really helps us drive smarter technology decisions. And there's so many in a given project that we can start to make those decisions more confidently and more accurately based off some real insight that's starting to come back from users, stakeholders that we talk to along the way.
Yeah. So that's super helpful. We're in the solution stage. How far down the road of design? So I know we're focused on kind of user experience, user interface design at this stage. It's really exciting because the product's really coming to life at that point. And we also address things like technical strategy in this kind of generate and prototype phase. How far do we take it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's people start to rally kind of around the vision. It's starting to emerge. Now it's getting more formal. Like I could see the screens and I can get a sense, especially once we start getting feedback from users. This is exciting. One thing that we do try to stress up front is that discovery is about the experiments and testing those assumptions. It is not about like completely designing the product up front.
That's super important.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between an agile process and a waterfall process.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. That we are constantly learning along the way. And it is an agile process. As we go through discovery, our team's goal is to get to code as quickly as we can, but we're inserting this kind of experimental activity and getting this feedback to kind of hit the high level patterns, the high level risks, and make smart decisions that would be otherwise harder to untangle later down the road, but not to completely eliminate risk and not let it become this weighty thing that takes the team a long time to get to the build.
Yeah, so we're prototyping key interactions. That's around getting some validation on some problems that we're going to solve. So now we have a solution. So we're ready to build, right?
Yeah. So so we have tested those critical assumptions. Now we're ready to start the build. We are almost there, but the last piece of this, which is the last phase of the discovery that we call kind of the alignment space, is to say, based on all that we've learned, before we set off on the build, and we know everybody's eager to do that, let's
especially me
rally around therefore, the vision for what this first release of the product is going to, there's certain foundations that we have to set into place around data and front and back end, questions, integrations, things like that. And we now have a good sense of what the critical feature set is.
Because we put the prototype in front of users.
Yeah, and
we've gotten some feedback on
that.
Okay.
We understand the technologies and what the constraints are. So therefore, we can come back. So we kind of close out discovery with a high-level release plan for the product. And we understand we make our initial recommendation. It's a very transparent and open and collaborative discussion with our client about these features are in, and here's why, because it completely solves a problem for the user. It'll get us to market faster. We're not going to build 4 feature sets just yet. We're going to build it largely around 1 or 2. We're going to set all the foundations in place. We'll set the critical design patterns, but that can actually get you into the market faster. You could start marketing it. We could start collecting evidence in terms of analytics and metrics that this product is really going to do the things that we set out to do. But that doesn't mean that, the other features have to be far behind. Like, we now can start to roadmap and plan. So first release, second release, third. But we've got the critical patterns, the critical infrastructure in place to make all of that much more efficient when we get to them. So it is a real dance. You're taking an awful lot of complexity and kind of around user needs and technical constraints and business requirements, business rules, partnerships, and other stakeholder alignments, all in relation to now how to move forward with the build and minimizing kind of the disruptions that we would otherwise run into. You're always going to be discovering. We're trying to get the bulk of the critical discovery out up front so we can make smart decisions.
Yeah.
We're going to continue to discover along the way, but we don't want it to hold up the build. Now we're ready to start going into all that detail that comes with specifically, how's this going to work and how are we going to build that as a team. So
yeah, and the other really important thing about this alignment phase that I know we spend a lot of time on, and this is one of maybe the toughest parts of the alignment space. We love working with people who have big visions for their product, but we really want to help them and encourage them to start small. One of the realities that's just a good practice to do because you want to get a product into the market, you want to test product market fit, you want to get user feedback. But the other reality at this point is usually our vision for the product is bigger than our budget. So talk a little bit about how we kind of align the roadmap to the budget.
Yeah. So, it's really all about navigating trade-offs. And at this point, there's some magic. When we go through this as a team, when I say a team, like there's our team and the client team. By the time we get to this plan, there's real insight that we can look at and sort of objectively say, like, yes, we're hitting the right notes, or we know where the rough edges are, and we know what we need to do.
We know this feature has to be there because it's reducing these risks. These are all things we learned in the discovery process.
Yeah, and how do we navigate those difficult trade-offs at a business level, saying, like, there are cases where when we get into this, maybe, clarity, transparency, trying to have those hard discussions now, saying, like, we can do all of this, but we can't do these other things and still be in the same time and budget model, and empower our client to have a discussion around that. Sometimes it's increase the budget because now I know why. There's a good argument here and I can go get this additional funding to do it. And if it isn't going to take too much longer, let's go for it. In other cases, that makes sense. And maybe there are some pieces that we can kind of switch around, and that's a valuable thing.
And usually it's not, are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? But when are we going to do this? So features can get pushed into a future phase. We can use the funding that's available today to create an initial product that will get us into the market,
splash at a big trade show, or
something like that. But then we'll come right on the heels of that and begin, get additional funding approved and work on additional features right away. So that's. It's
a challenging, but really there's a lot of magic that happens in that. So we kind of start with a discovery workshop and we end with what's called the release planning workshop, where at this point we're now really unified as a team. Usually, the high level of trust, high level of clarity, and now let's just make the decisions that are going to keep us on track and successfully get to that launch. Once we have that in place, the teams can be off and running at a high velocity and really start, building in we know what the product needs to do. We know why that is. We know that we're completely solving a problem, and we're solving it in a way that's distinctive, that we've got some feedback that the users are going to love, like that they find it engaging and they'll be super excited when that is available. The company inside, the business inside can start preparing for training and marketing, customer support, those kinds of things. So there's often work that they have to do internally, and we're there to kind of help them along the way, understanding kind of where that product is. We will continue to learn as we go, but that risk factor is significantly ducked down as we get into the build.
So in discovery, we've clearly defined the problems. We have a compelling product strategy. We've got a solution. That solution's tested in the markets.
Yep.
All of this is driving down risk. It's building our confidence. We've got our team aligned, and we know what the phases of this product are. So now we're ready to build, right?
We are ready to build.
Okay.
There is that point, and that's a fun thing, and lots of future discussion around how we go about that.
Yeah. So if there were one thing that you wanted folks to take away from this discussion of discovery, what would you say is the one thing?
Really being ready to identify those assumptions, get that problem understanding up front. That's the most critical thing, because that's going to drive so much down the road. And understanding kind of where the risks are and validating. Like, if we're not experimenting in discovery, then it's not really a discovery.
Got it.
Having a healthy respect for sort of collecting that evidence to sort of boost confidence, know that you're on the right track, and make smarter, informed decisions when it really counts.
That's awesome.
Is critical.
All right. Thanks again, John. It's always a pleasure.
Super fun.
Yeah, this is a good conversation. So we hope that was valuable. Please join us in our next episode. In the next series of episodes, we're going to take an even deeper dive into the problem space, the solution space. We're going to talk about some of the tools we use to unpack that. So join us next time for a deeper dive. If this has been valuable to you, click on that subscribe button so that you make sure you're notified when we publish these episodes. Thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.